Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, irresponsible opinions about classic film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week, it's the Hollywood Studios Year by Year. We're doing Paramount 1935 this time out. We'll be talking about Private Worlds, directed by Gregory LaCava, and Peter Ibbetson, directed by Henry Hathaway.
So I initially thought that these would be very clashing movies, clashing style of movies to view together, talk about together. I mean, I guess there is some thematic continuity.
Quite a lot, I think. They both have to do with people who are potentially trapped in their own interpretation of the universe.
Yeah, but Peter Ibbetson is a fantasy romance, and Private Worlds is a very odd 1935 film to find in Hollywood about the relationships of doctors in a psychiatric hospital. Their professional and personal relationships with each other.
It's all combined here, everything rolled into one. And we're going to start with Private Worlds, so let's dive right into it.
Well, they're both very odd and unusual movies, too. We can say that about them. I would be curious to know, and I did not find this out in research, who instigated Private Worlds, because it's this odd feminist film. It's about, well, feminist in the sense that the main character is Claudette Colbert's psychiatrist, and she has to deal with the problems of being a woman psychiatrist in the 1930s, including facing sexism from her boss. Generally takes a very progressive, for the time and practically for now, attitude toward mental illness.
It does. It treats everything as a continuum, which I think is the right way to approach these things.
You can pass into illness, you can pass again into health, and there's not that stark a difference between the two, even when each are functioning. From what I have heard, because don't we all know plenty of people who have been diagnosed with various mental illnesses? From what I've heard, the definition by psychiatrists of mental illness is now very pragmatic, in that it is whatever is preventing you from functioning in your relationships and work life that you are unhappy about. It has to make you unhappy, which is brought up in the film, and it has to do that in part by disrupting your life.
Yeah, and your ability to relate to others. This film, it was produced by Walter Wanger, who had his own production unit within Paramount. So it's not really a mainline Paramount production, unlike Peter Ibbetson, which was churned out recognizably by the same studio that was making other offbeat weird films by people like Sternberg. Peter Ibbetson feels like something made by the studio that was also giving von Sternberg his head. Private Worlds, yeah, it does seem to come out of a slightly different corner of Hollywood, and that's Walter Wanger's corner. And he was a very interesting figure. Did some time at Columbia when Capra was really getting started. Then he came over to Paramount for the mid-30s. He was doing this kind of thing. And then he kind of went off completely on his own. Married Joan Bennett much later. Maybe this is where they first met. It's possible, anyway. They would work together with Fritz Lang on a whole bunch of great independent productions in the 40s that people remember fondly. And then he had his own breakdown when he thought that his wife was having an affair with her agent and surprised them and shot the guy. He didn't die, but Wanger did go to jail for a few years, and then he came back and went back to producing movies.
Oh dear.
He did make I Want to Live, the Susan Hayward movie about being on death row. So
sounds like he went a little crazy for a while there.
He did. He totally did. But they didn't get divorced. They stayed married until the 60s, then she divorced him.
Over leaving the toilet seat up.
Who knows exactly what the final straw was. This film, it does have Claudette Colbert, who is a major Paramount star at this point. But other than that, it doesn't really partake all that much of the regular Paramount features that you'd associate with the studio in the early to mid 1930s.
So none of these others? It's kind of an all-star cast.
It really is.
By our current standards, but not necessarily stars at the time. There's Charles Boyer, who looks like this could have been his first lead Hollywood role, although he's still making films in France as well at this time.
He's a transatlantic star at this point. Yeah, we first saw him in Red-Headed Woman, which is 1932, but that was a small role as the chauffeur. Yeah, he keeps making movies in France. I think he comes over almost for good when he does Algiers, the remake of Pepe Le Moco, and that's like 37, 38, around then.
Of course, Joel McCrea and Claudette Colbert will be reunited at Paramount in...
Palm Beach Story.
In Palm Beach Story. Famously, I don't know if they did anything together in the interim.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. It's possible.
Joan Bennett, not a regular at Paramount?
No.
We've seen her in...
Fox.
Yeah, Fox with Spencer Tracy. This is a very different role, and she plays it very well. It's amazing how Joan Bennett really has range.
Well,
she can be a sweet and fragile wife, as she is in this movie, or she can be a fresh Bezock, as she was in... What was it called? For Me and My Gal?
Just Me and My Gal.
Me and My Gal, right.
And then she could dye her hair and become one of the most celebrated femme fatales of the 40s.
Sure, and then in the 50s, she could be a sort of obsessive, nasty, in a different way, Sirkian wife.
She's not a Paramount regular. Joel McCrea had been at RKO. We've seen him in some RKO movies before this. He winds up going on contract at Goldwyn, I think. So yeah, none of these people are Paramount stars except for Colbert.
We should just mention the source material here because it is very distinctive. Based on a novel by, and I'm going to go with this pronunciation, Phyllis Bottom, because she was British, although the daughter of an American clergyman, so who knows? Reverend William MacDonald Bottom, and an English mother. But in the course of her marriage, she ended up living in Vienna for a while, where she studied individual psychology under Alfred Adler. She also wrote a biography of Adler, so obviously he made a deep impression. She also lived in Germany in the late 1930s, which inspired her to write the novel The Mortal Storm, which is an anti-fascist novel that became the basis for the Borghese movie, which is basically the first anti-fascist Hollywood film.
It's one of the first. There are others before that, including Little Man What Now, Borghese.
That's a little clouded the politics of that film.
Confessions of a Nazi Spy is 1938. That's a Warner Brothers film. And William Dieterle's Blockade is a Spanish Civil War movie from 1937 that's clearly an anti-fascist film. So there were some precursors.
Well, it often gets credit as the first anti-fascist
It's one of the
Hollywood
best.
film. She wrote a hell of a lot of novels. I haven't been able to find synopses of many of them. It doesn't appear that all of them were political or message films.
Looking forward to reading her. I got in an original paperback copy of Private Worlds from the 1930s, so it's on my list of things to read. Right now I'm still reading Fanny Hurst. I'm gonna get to Phyllis Bottom soon.
For the general public, she appears to be a footnote to the career of Ian Fleming.
Oh god.
I know, terrible, isn't it? Who possibly took the idea of James Bond from the character Mark Chalmers in her spy novel, The Lifeline.
I'll bet that's better than Ian Fleming.
Yeah, I bet it's not a lot like James Bond. Back to the movie.
It's set at a quite expensive looking retreat, mental health retreat. Some people call it an asylum, but clearly the progressive doctors who are running it at the start of the film don't want to think of it that way. Somewhere in the northeast of the United States. One thing that I couldn't help thinking of this time out is how some aspects of it do recall, or anyway, they make one think of Spellbound by Hitchcock, which would come 10 years later.
Really? I don't remember that being a particularly progressive film about women or mental illness.
Not particularly, no, but it does have the same setting, right? Grade A mental health facility, and so much of it, at the beginning at least, is set in the kind of lunch rooms with the doctors gossiping about each other. And there are a bunch of people that have their opinions about Ingrid Bergman as a female doctor and when she's going to crack.
Sure, but here we have a lot of confidence. Claudette Colbert is the main viewpoint of the film and also its latent hero.
It's actually instructive to look at where they depart from one another.
I haven't seen Spellbound in a long time. Not one of my favorite Hitchcock.
I really like it, but it's certainly got issues.
Well, that wouldn't be a reason for me not to like it, because I love Marnie, for example. It just happens to not be one of my favorite Hitchcocks. But again, I haven't seen it since my 20s. So what I found really interesting, okay, so we saw we watched this together once before. It was a discovery. You hadn't seen it either.
No.
I think the print was not so good, but you managed to find a better copy this time.
Yeah, this was much better.
So we liked it the first time, but I really liked it this time. And also the print revealed to me how extraordinarily gorgeous Charles Boyer is at this time. The poor man's in his 40s by the time he becomes a Hollywood movie star, and he was good enough for the eyes of a lot of women, but he's never done much for me. But at this point, every time that face appears on the screen, I was riveted.
Oh, well, he's one of the greatest. Getting started.
I barely even noticed Joel McCrea. That's how good Boyer looks in this movie. And it really helps because he's a bit of a jerk when we first meet him.
It's true.
Of course, not nearly as much of a jerk as he would later play. A lot.
He's
often.
got a lot of range, Charles Boyer. And here, actually, we get to see a lot of the things that he can do all in one character.
It's true.
So it's a very nice introduction.
LaCava is credited as working on the screenplay, which he
always did.
Always did. Did he always get a credit?
I'm not sure if he always got a credit, but I know that, yeah, he rewrote things on the fly all the time, and so much of his art was focused on improvisation, as we know from Kendall's book on Stage Door, especially. That whole movie is improvisation. I think that's the most extreme example. So he didn't like to stick to a set script.
Well, I was very impressed in this movie at the complexity of the relationships. That's really what it's all about between the doctors and their significant others.
And their patients.
Yeah, sure. The patients come into it.
At the beginning of this film, the superintendent of this facility has departed. We've got McCrea and Colbert, a congenial team, young progressive doctors on the staff, and they have been slowly but surely transforming the methods in use at the hospital. And McCrea feels like he's in line, and most people seem to think that it's true. He is in line for promotion to superintendent, and when we meet them all, he's on his way to meet the board of directors. Sadly, when he gets back from that meeting, we find out that he has been passed over in favor of someone who came out of nowhere.
But before that happens, we get an important scene between Claudette Colbert and Joan Bennett, who is his wife. Get the picture that all is not quite as calm under the surface as things appear, that there's emotional trouble brewing here. This has kind of been they say so in so many words, a three-way relationship of a sort, in that Colbert, who is single, has been close friends with the couple, so she has this heart-to-heart with the wife. The wife expresses some jealousy, not that she doesn't trust Colbert, but just jealousy of the understanding between her and her husband as professional colleagues. And Colbert tells her, actually, I probably love you more than I do him, and that becomes very important in what's going to follow. It's a very strong but complicated bond between the two women.
And Colbert also tells us right in that scene that she had this great love of her life who was killed during World War I, shot as a deserter, actually. So that's pretty serious trauma. It's bad enough to hear that your fiance was killed in the war, but killed by your own side for a transgression against the state. Well, that is enough to send you reeling. And in her case, it sent her into professional training to be a psychiatrist. She is one of these characters, right, that has devoted herself to her career. She doesn't say that she has forever closed off all possibility of romance, but that's kind of what it seems like.
So it's interesting seeing Colbert in this right after doing the Imitation of Life episode.
She is on fire in the early 30s here. I mean, 34, she did Imitation of Life, she did Cleopatra, she did It Happened One Night, that she won the Oscar for.
I think it was first in Imitation of Life that I noticed her sort of default persona. I noticed it because it comes off as condescending and problematic in some of the scenes with Louise Beavers, but then you start to notice that actually this is simply the way her character behaves to everybody, which is that she treats everybody with amused irony.
Of course. She's the greatest exponent of amused irony in Hollywood, I think.
And that's largely what she does in this movie, and it is interesting because it can be used to signify a character who keeps people at a distance.
Sure.
There are a couple of scenes in this film where she shows the kind of vulnerability that makes her performance in It Happened One Night very different.
Oh yeah, she's not a prisoner of irony. She can break out of that when the role demands it. When irony is required, she is definitely the person you want on the job.
And it, of course, makes her very good in romantic comedy.
It's actually too bad, in a way. I don't think that she ever did a movie with Cary Grant. They would have been very good together. Or maybe too much irony.
Yeah, nobody would ever be able to make an emotional breakthrough. If they did, it was one of those pairings that turned out to be surprisingly disappointing. A bad director or something like that.
That's the situation. Everybody's up in arms. Now, there's also the matron, we should mention. She's been, from the start, the voice of 19th century, stodgy, medieval attitudes toward mental illness.
Well, we see this kind of character a lot, including all the way up to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Voice of conservative female authority.
Her solution to any problem, if any of the patients starts disobeying orders, put them in solitary. And Colbert...
very amused and ironic about that.
But not only, she's really fighting it, too.
Of course.
Because the idea, which she reiterates at several junctures, is that we're trying to bring people out of solitary. They're all trapped in solitary when they come to us. So putting them in rooms by themselves is not the solution. It's making things worse.
Matron thinks if you misbehave, you should be punished.
Right. And she also treats the whole place just as a jail where no one is ever going to emerge. She's fine with that. She says if they keep fixing everyone, we're not going to have any patience.
She does say that.
Perfect insight right there.
McCrae comes back grumpy. We hear that he's moody, and he does stay in moody mode for pretty much the whole film.
Joel McCrae is so good at playing someone who is, you feel that at heart he's a good guy, but he acts like an ass most of the movie, which is what he often does. Sturges has him do this too, right? He acts like this throughout the Palm Beach story. He's just throwing fits every moment.
Yeah, and he's basically the same way in Sullivan's Travels.
Yeah.
He's just moody.
He's a grumpy guy.
He's just like William Demarest, except tall and handsome.
Yeah.
He comes back from this meeting. He's very, very grumpy. Joan Bennett gives a good impression of a woman who is both a little bit afraid of her husband, emotionally, not physically, and really doesn't know how to comfort him.
No.
She's not playing the wife role with confidence. On the other hand, Claudette Colbert perfectly knows how to soothe him and sort of work around this mood. So he's upset because he's been passed over, and also the rumor is that this new superintendent doesn't like women doctors. McCrae starts going on about how he's going to quit.
In solidarity, because he anticipates that Colbert will be fired.
And that's why this earlier conversation with the two women is important, because we know that her main motivation in not allowing him to quit or causing him to quit is because she's worried about the wife.
She doesn't want to throw their world into turmoil over her potential battle with this conservative guy. She does seem to think there's a possibility she'll be fired. She doesn't act like this is unheard of, that there could be someone who has risen to this status in the profession who has such archaic ideas that he just believes categorically women can't be good doctors.
Yeah, later on, McCrae has an argument with Boyer over this, and McCrae keeps telling him it's a matter of prejudice, and the doctor's just like, no, not at all, it isn't. So he clearly just thinks it's a matter of fact.
Empirically, they all suck.
So obviously, at this point, there is no legal protection for women being fired.
No, if you get a boss in that thinks that women shouldn't be there, they can just be dismissed. Now, he doesn't do that, but he does reassign her. And actually, it's important, I think, we should mention, the way the hospital is set up is that Colbert is responsible for handling the men and McCrae is responsible for handling the women. And we see very quick little scenes with each of them, and they're pretty much doing half doctoring and half flirting. And that is how they handle their patients. And it seems to be working.
I don't see Colbert as flirting with her patients. She's doing more maternal soothing. Clearly she's established something where the men don't find her threatening, and that's very important to getting them to calm down and cooperate.
Yeah, but look at how McCrae handles that first scene. Like, he sits down and gives a pretty standard pep talk about fighting back against life, and clearly the woman is cheered a bit by that, but cheered even more by the fact that she gets to sit with Joel McCrae.
Well, if your fucking doctors looked like Joel McCrae and Claudette Colbert, then that would be an interesting form of therapy.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that does seem to be part of what's going on in this movie. That there is...
transference?
Exactly.
It's not Freud, but everything's kind of thrown into the pot here. There's a little bit of Freud. There's obviously a little bit of Adler. Not that I know much about Adler.
They're definitely making use of their personal charm in trying to bring about a cure for these people.
Yes, and that is not, in Freud, that's a problem that has to be dealt with in this movie. It's just good doctoring.
Yeah, well, for Boyer, it's not. He wants her out of the men's ward, and he wants to put McCrae in charge of the men instead. She's going to be in charge of outpatients, which is obviously, as you say, a demotion, because these are people that don't really need nearly as much help.
Now, of course, in the history of psychiatry, at this point there is no stark separation. I don't know if it was really mingled in exactly the way that this movie shows, but there's no stark separation between medical psychiatry and psychoanalysis and psychology.
Yeah, well, these are definitely psychiatrists because they've been trained as doctors. They can perform surgery.
But they talk to each other and to some extent to their patients in terms borrowed from psychoanalysis and psychology more broadly, like the work of Adler. And they psychoanalyze each other.
Oh, yeah.
And they really buy this. They buy this idea of individual development through learning and maturity and self-knowledge. And that's the way they talk to their patients. That's the substance of the pep talk.
Yeah, it's Socratic method, some of it. Big hospital, there are a lot of other people on staff. The only other doctor that we get to know fairly well is Samuel Hines, who plays Peter Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life.
We don't ever find out anything of interest about him, though, such as why he was a patient and whether he was a doctor before, or I guess he was because he's an old guy.
Yeah.
But how this all came about, that he went from doctor to patient and back to doctor, which would be very interesting, but we don't find out anything about it.
Well, it would be, but in other ways, I think it's even more interesting this way. They just put that there as part of his backstory, that he was a patient at the hospital for a while, and now he's on staff. There's no special pleading made in his case, like, oh, this is a very unusual situation. They just make it seem like, yeah, a doctor could become a patient at any time, and then could be returned to their normal job after they get over whatever was bothering them, right? So in some ways, not knowing the specifics make it just seem like a more common thing. And he does have a lot of insight. He's always very attentive, and he puts his finger right on what's bothering Colbert at a crucial point when she tries to ask for advice using one of these "my friend has this problem" stories.
Sure.
And he's like, "You're in love with Charles Boyer."
Yeah, and so the first face-off between the two of them, where he demotes her, and she's not interested in putting up a fuss. There seems to be several motivations for that. First is that she doesn't want McCrae to freak out for the sake of his wife, her friend. And then also she seems to be playing the long game. Thinking rather than me stomping out of here in a huff, I'll just take opportunities to show my value and to sass this guy a bit in a flirty way, and maybe he'll come around.
Yeah, well, it happens right away, too. She gets an opportunity right there, which McCrae helps to facilitate when they say, okay, look, this guy won't get out of his car. Nobody can get him out of his car. Maybe Dr. Everest should take a try, Claudette Colbert. And she goes down. Boyer watches from his window and sees that clearly she can achieve results that nobody else can. So, and we never actually see her switched over to the outpatient ward. I don't even think it happens.
So it doesn't seem very fair, but in this world with no laws protecting your employment, it's kind of like in Peyton Place, where the doctor tells Betty, where Rossi tells Betty, there's going to be Miss Shotes everywhere.
Yeah.
Basically, there's going to be a potential Charles Boyer anywhere that you work, so you might as well figure out how to deal with them.
Well, Colbert takes it on faith that what he's saying is true, that he will pay attention to empirical evidence and will adjust. And actually, that does prove to be the case.
Yes, it's very possible that he's never worked with a woman doctor before.
Right, he just has this idea in his head. Now, the other thing that's going on with Boyer that becomes apparent right away is that he has this sister that has tagged along with him, and there's something going on with her. We don't know what at first, but she doesn't really belong there. She acts like a complete jerk immediately, saying that everybody here gives her a bad feeling, and she doesn't like anything about this.
Yeah, but she also seems like the craziest person we've met.
Well, I think that's pretty obviously part of the film's strategy, yeah. Afraid of these people because she knows that she could be hospitalized at any moment.
Yeah, and we believe it.
That's Helen Vinson, one of the great character actresses of the 1930s. She so often got stuck playing the other woman role.
Which she does here.
Yeah, part of the reason for that is that she's so good at it. I don't know if you remember her in Name Only. That's a great little role where she has that fight with Cary Grant where they're trying to change the radio station on the car and they have that accident.
She doesn't really seem mentally ill, but she seems like a sociopath, and we find out that she is.
Yeah, she is.
When we first meet these two, Boyer is kind of coming off as a bit of a...
stuffed shirt.
Well, I was going to say gothic hero type. He's handsome, he's charismatic, he's European.
Rochester.
He's prejudiced against women, and he has this mysterious sister relationship going on here. There's obviously some kind of mystery here.
Yeah.
I was going to say the third reason that Colbert doesn't outright fight him is clearly because she's attracted to him instantly.
When they talk about this guy that they've hired, everybody's picturing some old guy with a long beard or something, right? Because he's so conservative. And then she walks in and it's Charles Boyer. It's a bit different.
She's like, I can work with this. I can charm mental patients out of trees. I can handle this guy. It's an interesting cafeteria scene where we see Matron off sitting by herself and shooting scornful one-liners at the table full of doctors who themselves are...
divided against one another.
Yeah, and not necessarily that progressive about women doctors either, other than the ex-mental patient.
Yeah, there's a couple of conservative doctors on staff as well. Who just like to make snide remarks about Colbert and her sex life or what they theorize about it.
Sure. Obviously, everybody's theorizing about her and McCrae.
Yeah. There have been a lot of rumors about that, and the rumors won't stop. They might just switch over. A lot of the rest of the film, the plot is generated out of how these characters are going to settle into a pattern of work together. What the fallout is going to be from this X factor, particularly of the sister, Helen Vincent, who wants to act out against her brother, who's given her direct orders to stay out of the affairs of the hospital. And of course, she's going to do the reverse.
Well, we get the big scene where Claudette Colbert definitely proves herself and also gets more romantic with Charles Boyer. First, though, we get the dinner party that they all go to, the welcoming dinner party, where we find out that Boyer may not be progressive about women, but he does share their generally progressive attitude toward the patients. So there is a servant. I guess the house must just be on the ground and rotate among the superintendents, like a clergyman or something. So they have their servant is one of the patients who's going to be let out soon.
It's like a step towards the outside world. First, you get to handle some responsibilities on the grounds, and they can check in with you while you're doing that. And if all of that goes fine, then you can remove yourself into the general run of life once again.
So Colbert is doing some psychoanalysis of Boyer using his pet turtle.
Yeah.
And that works, that charms him. But meanwhile, McCrae is still, even though, well, okay, at this point, he still doesn't know what's going to go on with Colbert, right? He still thinks she is possibly being demoted. And he's also pissed for the entire movie that he's been passed over for this promotion. He's just decided that he hates Charles Boyer. Maybe he's jealous, too.
Well, he is, definitely. And because of that, and because he's in such a bad mood, and because his wife doesn't know how to talk to him or relate to him when he gets into these states, there's a distance growing between them. And even worse, Helen Vincent is dead set on creating the most disruption she can, and she zeroes in on McCrae as the fulcrum. Because she is Boyer's sister, well, he's going to do it. He's going to go for at least the appearance of starting an affair with her.
Helen Vincent gets exactly one line sort of accounting for her... Well, no, there's a couple of lines. One that Boyer says to her when he kicks her out of the house later, too. There are a few lines indicating that she's had an unhealthy relationship with this somewhat sexist brother who doesn't let her do anything and doesn't make her do anything, so she's just turned into this useless fashion horse.
Yeah.
Doesn't know what to do with herself and has become a hysterical nymphomaniac, basically, because she has no idea what to do with her life. So we get this spectrum of women where the working woman is very healthy because she does have something to do with her life, right?
Yeah, and something to think about.
She's well adjusted, and then the wife and the slut are both having a lot of problems based on having no aim.
We should talk now, though, about the patient.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. So you mentioned the scene where Joel McCrea is using his charm to calm her down. This happens when she bursts into the room at the hospital where Colbert and Joan Bennett are having their conversation. And so Joan Bennett gets to witness this woman's illness and feels an identification with her based on the fact that they had both been bullied and the fact that she herself feels mentally fragile.
Carrie Flint. So Carrie Flint's an important patient, but also the patient that they call, because they don't know his name, the Arab.
Oh, that's the patient you're talking about.
Well, both of them
Sure.
are crucial to this. And there's Jerry as well. Those are the three key patients.
Well, yeah, I said there was this big scene where Colbert gets to prove herself.
Yeah.
And to be the hero.
There's a lot of interrelations between these. Now, early on, we see this man. He is bedridden, and they say that he's on the verge of death, and they don't know what he is asking for because nobody on staff speaks Arabic, and they just talk about it as if it's impossible to find anyone who can speak Arabic. His life is going to end in this completely miserable situation.
But this was very shocking, too, the first time we saw this movie, because when do you see a Hollywood movie at this point make any reference to Arabs, let alone treating them like ordinary people and not Arabian Nights characters?
His life is ebbing for the few days that we see him.
How really easy would it be for them to find, say, a professor of Arabic and fly them out for the sake of this homeless man? Like, is that going to happen?
Probably not, but it wouldn't be that hard if the expense could be borne by the institution.
There you go.
Right?
Clearly, they're not interested.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. So these are the most progressive doctors, but even they don't really take the time to that. They just say, oh, it's too bad we can't speak to him.
They also seem to think he's going to die at any minute.
Yeah, so I guess that's part of it. But they have no way to offer him any comfort or communicate with him at all. And Boyer, of course, this conservative, stodgy interloper, is the one.
Served in North Africa, presumably.
Yeah, maybe, right? He might have done a tour of duty with the French Foreign Legion or something, for whatever reason.
Or,
and of course,
or lived there, or trained there, or worked there.
Yeah, or there would have been a lot more people coming into France who spoke Arabic because they were part of La Francophonie.
Well, where is he going to meet them, though?
Well, if he lived in France until he came to America.
No, I mean socially.
Not socially.
Would these be rich Arabs?
No, but if they came to hospitals, he would have met them, right? And there would have been a lot of people coming to French hospitals who spoke Arabic.
I see, so he'd have to learn.
I'm not saying he'd have to, but it makes sense that he would be the one that could speak it, because he would have been...
I assumed it would only be as part of the colonial project that he would have had occasion to learn a difficult language like Arabic.
Yeah, well, the French Empire, right? That's why you would have had immigrants to France who spoke Arabic, because they were part of conquered territories in other parts of the world. Whatever the reason...
But this is, again, how much knowledge would you... We don't even know. How much knowledge would the average moviegoer bring watching this film to be able to figure out why Charles Boyer speaks Arabic?
Oh, no, well, they might not. But the key is that he does. And he sits down with this man.
Or would they? Would there constantly be newsreels about the French colonial project at the time?
Well, there were tons of French Foreign Legion movies, at the very least, right? Which are always set in North Africa.
Practically the only reason I have any clue about what's going on.
Right. So he sits down with this man and clearly offers him consolation. He's able to speak to him in Arabic, and he knows what the man is talking about. This does seem to do some good at the last moment.
They seem to be having a little religious conversation.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
Would make sense.
And Colbert watches this and realizes, okay, this guy is much more complicated than I thought.
But then he makes a mistake in that he wants to give this man some privacy as he dies, or give the other patients privacy while he talks to them. So he puts up the screens, and we know that...
Well, we've been told earlier that if Jerry sees this, he's gonna flip out.
Jerry is a giant guy that has a tendency to get violent when he is upset.
It's Gwyn Big Boy Williams. That's the name of the actor.
Have you seen him in other things?
Oh yeah, he's in a lot of movies.
And the Carrie Flint character also will get violent when she's upset.
Yes, we've heard that she has attacked nurses.
But it is of less consequence because this guy is a giant.
Yeah.
He's a big boy.
Yes.
And then we also find out at the beginning of this scene that Matron has defied Colbert's orders and has only put one security guard or whatever they're called.
Yeah, and in that case,
on duty.
That seems just like sheer perversity. Like, why do that? Other than to
I know better.
show disrespect.
I know better.
For the doctors. It almost has fatal consequences. Because
Well,
Boyer could have been killed, and Colbert too, and maybe others.
I think the idea is showing that Colbert's authority can also be challenged from below and from women on staff, which is, of course, something that professional women also had to face. She doesn't like women doctors either, she announces to everybody.
No, there's no place for them. The best woman role is supposed to be mine, the matron.
Exactly. This is the only place for women in this hospital, and I'm going to occupy it.
There's a big, violent scene that ensues. Fortunately, though, although the orderlies do subdue Jerry, they don't have to wrestle him to the ground and hurt him, because Colbert gets back up off the floor and is able to talk to him and reach him and convince him that he didn't really want to hurt anyone. He just lost control for a moment, and he is able to go back to bed without any further uproar. And Boyer sees this, too. So obviously this has to start him rethinking.
But he's gotten more injured than Colbert.
Yeah, he's got a fracture.
So because they also have basic medical training, she takes him off to take a look at the fracture.
Well, more than basic in Boyer's part, because he performs a complicated surgery.
Sure.
I don't know if Colbert can do that. Although she's doing a lot of lab research too, right?
Yeah, we hear a bunch about her research projects.
Yeah, so again, these are clinical doctors, and they have a lot of experience working with tissues. They're doing some very complicated research work there.
I mean, maybe they're doing terrible experiments on these patients without proper consent. It's entirely possible.
At least we see no scenes of shock therapy. We don't see anything like that.
It's true, so yeah, you'd hope.
Yeah.
You'd certainly hope.
McCrae has begun going out every night, or a lot of the time, with Helen Vinson, much to the chagrin of his wife. Boyer doesn't seem to be aware of what's going on, which is...
Well, no, he is, because when he has a talk later with Bennett, he knows exactly what's going on. He comforts her. He says, I'd rather have you for a sister.
Oh, well, he does say that, but he doesn't really say anything about his sister being involved with Joel McCrae.
That made me think that he has a reason for saying that to her, for trying to make her feel better, and also giving her permission for this tea party.
Which goes very badly, right?
So I think he's fully aware of what's going on.
So Joan Bennett takes it into her head that she can do something useful here, help one of the patients that she feels she has a special insight into.
Yeah, Carrie Flint. And she's also seen that Carrie Flint has regressed.
She's really gone backwards, from where we first meet her, when she's already not in a great way, but now she's really just repeating what people say.
Talking about herself in the third person.
Yeah, so she seems to be slipping through the cracks. If McCrae was treating her, and he's supposed to be responsible for the women's ward, then he's let this slip. She's gonna try to make up for it, and maybe even impress her husband by coming up with a way to reach a breakthrough.
This seems like a terrible idea.
Boyer goes for it. He figures, well, it can't hurt. And there's a nurse with Carrie the whole time.
Well, it doesn't hurt Carrie.
No, it doesn't. But it really does shock Joan Bennett, who feels like, okay, well, this was my last-ditch attempt. I don't know what to do. And she's pregnant. She feels like she can't tell Joel McCrae because she feels like their marriage is just about over. He's never coming home anymore. She doesn't really know what he's up to or how he feels about things anymore. And here we've got a nice call forward to the scene in Stage Door, where Andrea Leeds goes up the stairs hearing voices.
Oh, that's true.
Very interesting. LaCava does this. And both times it's very effective, I think, at conveying the mental state of the person who is in the throes of tragedy here.
I don't know if this was something personal from his own life, or if he just got that idea from the source and decided to use it in Stage Door. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. Now, there's a terrible storm raging, and the camera work by Shamroy is beautiful throughout.
Well, there's been some slanted angle shots whenever things get a little chaotic in the ward.
So we're brought into the subjective experience of Joan Bennett, and she collapses. We are really afraid for her life.
A rehearsal for the great sequence in Curtis Bernhardt's Possessed with Joan Crawford from the 40s.
Could be, yeah.
Creepiest sequences in any movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, I do feel like this...
Louise!
Yeah, this is an influential film, possibly.
Well, it's a very unusual film.
So if people did manage to see it at the time, I'm sure it's stuck in their mind. McCrae is out having not a good time. Like, he's not enjoying himself with Helen Vincent. He's grumpy with her, too. We don't see any affection between them. He's just sitting there with her. She's drunk, and he's talking about how they're going to have to stop doing this.
He's just trying to piss off
Yeah.
Boyer. There's no other... And it does make his rebellion, which is what she could have done, was within her rights to do. It does make his rebellion against authority seem very childish.
Yeah, it does.
And then, okay, there's a whole sequence with Matron having to resign after the dust up.
Well, she fucked up and then refuses to take responsibility for it and makes things worse by trying to call out all of her superiors and talking about gossip that might involve them.
It almost seems like a sort of soothing idea the novel's trying to convey, that having a woman in a position of authority doesn't mean undermining authority. That sort of thing. Undermining the idea of authority. It's still necessary, and this is not a challenge to it.
Right.
She's going to fit within this structure. And, she'll earn her position by proving herself within it, not by challenging the status quo or whatever. There's the whole nice sequence. Colbert doesn't actually want Matron to be fired. She just wants her to quit acting up.
Right. And join the 20th century.
And so she ultimately is welcomed back by Charles Boyer, as long as she can, as I say, behave herself. And then there's this little comedy sequence where she immediately starts, because I guess this is her main job. Her main job is to keep the interns and the nurses from having sex in the hallway.
It's really interesting, too. There's a nice little move back and forth. At first, the matron is delighted that Boyer's been hired because she thinks that he's going to run the institution the way she's always wanted to see it run. Then when he demands her resignation, she shrieks about foreigners being brought in.
Yeah.
And then when he makes an overture to her to return, she's delighted again, and we never hear any more xenophobic rants out of her. It's a really nice example of how this xenophobic resentment comes out of other things, right? People will reach for this language when they're frustrated about other stuff.
Joel McCrae does the same thing.
Yeah.
He starts talking about this stupid foreigner. I don't know where he's from, France, Vienna, something. Even though he's like this big progressive doctor who's okay with women and everything else.
Yeah, but he's been thwarted, and so he's going to reach for the easiest insult, which is, this guy's not from around here. But the big incident that everything sort of coalesces around is the accident where Joan Bennett falls down the stairs and may die, probably because of a potential miscarriage, right?
Now, right at the same time that that's happening, Colbert and Boyer are having a discussion. So she has had her discussion with
Samuel Hines.
He has prompted her to realize that she is falling in love, as we already know, with Charles Boyer. And so she goes to try to talk to him about this, but she's having a hard time getting the words out. So I guess she wants to discuss two things, and they keep getting jumbled up, which is the situation with Joel McCrae and his sister.
Yeah.
And then also the situation with feelings developing between them and how that's going to affect their professional relationship. But Boyer doesn't understand, and so he gives a big angry speech to her, because he doesn't know that she's in love with him. That big angry lecture about how his sister is less of a threat to that marriage than she is, because she has formed this professional bond with McCrae, and that's the real source of Joan Bennett's jealousy. And we know that this is good psychological insight, that this is maybe not fair, but true. It's true.
That's what started to undermine Bennett's confidence anyway, that she couldn't relate to McCrae on the high plane that he dwells on most of the time. It's hilarious
the way Boyer puts it, like, a woman like you, he could never get over or get past a woman like you. So this idea that she's some kind of superhero, that she's, gorgeous Claudette Colbert, and she's also this super doctor.
Yeah, whereas Helen Vincent is just someone that you pass the time with or go to the bar with.
Well, we'll see this conflict come up in various ways in certain movies of this time. Wife versus secretary is even a version of it, even with that mere secretary. at MGM.
Yeah. Boyer does save Joan Bennett's life. Obviously, this starts to smooth things over with Joel McCrea. He's no longer quite so resentful of the man who...
Well, he also knows that he's the one immediately responsible for this.
Yeah, of course. And we do have that great scene where Helen Vinson wakes up. We sort of see the world from her perspective just for a few minutes, right? Like, the sun is shining. She is...
Well, because she was passing out drunk on his shoulder the last time we saw him as he was driving her home.
Yeah, but that's just a normal night for her, and she wakes up in bed, and she's all cozy.
A full face of makeup on.
Yeah.
And just starts staring at herself in the mirror.
Everything's all beautiful. She's ready for another day.
So we didn't even mention what her crime was. That her brother has been protecting her from all this time, which was that she killed her husband.
We're not sure exactly what happened. Now, she's never punished, so... Obviously...
But he was her only witness, that's what we hear. And he talks about protecting her. And that was his best friend. So this is a whole, crazy melodrama plot in the background that we don't find out that much about.
Yeah, I would have liked to see in the prequel. But the code obviously doesn't think that she's definitely guilty, or else she would have to go to jail.
Sure.
Instead, all she has to do is
go
leave
to work.
The hospital. Yeah.
She has to go to work. He's told her that. You're not going to be a parasite anymore.
Right. Now, I'm not sure if that's entirely fair. Obviously, it would be nice to see things a bit more from her side, but we do get that.
No, he says there is no side here. She's a sociopath. But he says, I have created this situation.
Right.
By
coddling you
and also not allowing you to do things. And this has to change now. Bye-bye. Sink or swim. Bye-bye.
So that's where we leave her.
Frankly, she's probably going to go out and kill again. That's the vibe that I get from this.
Well, it's hard to say. Obviously, the code didn't think so. They thought maybe
she'll swim. Maybe some work will straighten her out.
Right. That's obviously the hope.
Learning shorthand.
We work our way towards our finale.
A very cute finale.
She wants to resign.
Well, what this all leads up to, and what LaCava's vision of all of this seems to be, is this idea of kind of a retreat into childhood that all of these so-called mentally normal doctors have been guilty of in the course of the film.
Well, again, and that's sort of what's going on with Spellbound as well. Even though it's different traumas, it's also thinking about the psychological lives of the psychiatrists, right?
And this is sort of vaguely Freudian, and maybe it's vaguely Adlerian too, the idea that engaging in self-analysis, the purpose of it is to gain knowledge of yourself that will help you develop and mature as an individual.
Yeah, and give you insight into other people. The finale involves a toy rabbit.
Yeah.
And a reconciliation on the personal and the professional planes between Boyer and Colbert.
Oh yeah, there's that adorable comedy scene with Joel McCrea and Charles Boyer, where McCrea is trying to send him off to get Colbert back. Well, basically to admit his feelings to Colbert, but they couch it in terms of how important she is to the hospital, which is true, but not what they're really talking about.
No, it's all very, very well done. It's nice to see a movie from the 1930s where the romantic resolution does not rule out the career development of a woman. Usually it's one or the other.
This is a very unusual movie.
So their rapprochement means that she'll also be able to do more and better work at the hospital, and she can marry her boss.
Yeah, I guess there'll be a romantic research team, which happened, and I think still happens all the time.
Sure, the Curies. So that's Private Worlds.
Pretty cool movie.
Now on to Peter Ibbetson, which was one of Buñuel's favorite Hollywood films, right up there with Portrait of Jenny.
Well, it does bear some resemblances, and I hadn't seen this since I was in my early 20s, and I had no real memory of it other than the basic idea. We had contemplated doing this for our time travel podcast, but thought that there wouldn't be a strong enough connection, but actually there definitely is.
Yeah,
it is in a way a time travel story.
It is, absolutely.
I hadn't realized that George du Maurier only wrote 2 novels.
Really?
Yeah.
It's only this one and Trilby?
Trilby, the basis for
the Svengali story.
And the Svengali idea, which is probably more familiar than the film versions at this point. Well, Well, I guess 3. There's also something called The Martian, which is apparently largely autobiographical.
Not the Matt Damon Martian.
So I don't know what that's about. Anyway, Peter Ibbetson was his first novel. He was a late 19th century author, palsy with the sort of people who knew Oscar Wilde, and a cartoonist for Punch initially, before he became a novelist.
So this is what they call a film blanc.
Is it now?
That's a term that's become increasingly popular over the past few years.
It has? I've never heard of this.
You'll see it everywhere if you look for it.
Where's everywhere?
Articles on the film blanc in different film magazines. And
you read film magazines? Since when?
Online film magazines.
You read online film
magazines?
Sometimes,
yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
I didn't know. This is a secret life you're leading that I didn't know anything about.
Anyway, It's a Wonderful Life is a film blanc.
No, it's not.
In a lot of ways it is, because there is, the whole idea of the film blanc is that there is a comforting cosmic order at the top of all of it, even if there's a lot of suffering portrayed.
Exactly. Like, what kind of comforting cosmic order causes the kind of suffering in life that we see in either of those films?
Well, I'm just saying.
Not very comforting to me.
Ultimately, everything's going to be okay. That's the message of this film, right? There is something beyond this earth which sucks.
This earth completely sucks. That must be one of the tropes of the genre in that case, that the earth that we have completely sucks.
Well, not necessarily. It doesn't have to have that portrayal of the earth, but what it does have to have is an afterlife that is going to be great for everybody concerned. So that's where the similarities lie.
Other than those two films, what are other examples of this?
A Matter of Life and Death is another one that's described as a film blanc. The Bishop's Wife. Anything that has a cosmic order, Here Comes Mr. Jordan, that interferes with the earth or brings a message to the earth that all will be well after death, or that there is something else on a higher plane that is going to reconcile the horrors and seemingly senseless striving of our earthly existence.
But anyway, that is not a part of this film that I enjoyed. What is a part of it that I enjoyed is its, general sort of eerie atmosphere.
Oh, yeah.
Some very, very beautiful cinematography.
It's one of the best looking movies of the 1930s. Just for that, everyone needs to see it. It really does the job of conveying
an otherworldly atmosphere?
It has to be there. And also a temporal displacement quality, right? Just the way Hathaway shoots that scene where Gary Cooper returns to the old estate and is looking up at that tree where he last saw Mimsy. It's incredible. One moment even is enough to make it a great movie. But actually my favorite stuff in the movie is the first 10 minutes. That's one of the best childhood scenes ever done.
Kind of reminded me a bit of another great children's movie that has a world of its own sort of atmosphere. I'm of course talking about Secret Garden.
Oh yeah. Okay.
From what year is that? The one with Herbert Marshall and Dean Stockwell.
That's 1949.
And Margaret O'Brien?
Yeah, Margaret O'Brien.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
It is. That extended sequence at the beginning, that stars Dickie Moore and Virginia Weidler, both obviously very gifted child actors of the 1930s.
Now, this cinematographer we should mention, he did do in the 40s some films also associated with otherworldliness, The Uninvited, and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, which I guess would be a film blanche.
Well, I know Lee Garms was also involved in this movie, in shooting this movie. I don't think he was credited, but he was involved with it, as far as I know.
Well, he's great, but Charles Lang seems to be great too.
But just to give a little continuity, right, to the Paramount imprimatur, Lee Garms shooting all those Sternberg movies in the early 30s.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about that in this Wikipedia.
Really?
Nope.
So that scene really sets the tone.
Yeah, of course, it's a wonderful use of Dickie Moore, I absolutely love him in Blonde Venus. He has this, and what else, was he in some of the Dickens ones? No, he's not one of the Dickens actors.
No, it's Freddie Bartholomew, who we're going to be seeing shortly in David Copperfield.
He's also great.
Yeah.
But Dickie Moore, I guess I primarily remember him for Blonde Venus, where he has a major role, and he has this combination of extreme beauty with a kind of roughhousing boy quality that's quite interesting.
Yeah, so here he's Go-Go, and Virginia Weidler obviously would go on to even greater fame in the Philadelphia Story.
I thought that was her.
Yeah, it's her.
That's her face.
Of course it's her. She's very young here. This is a few years before the Philadelphia Story, and she's not that old in that movie. She's also incredible in The Great Man Votes, which we will be doing when we get to RKO 39. She is just as good as Dickie Moore at carrying on this very complicated relationship, right? They fight on the surface, but they love each other. That's so easy to say, and as people, we kind of understand this from what we recall as kids, but to really show it as well as this movie does is not easy.
I don't know, there's just something about Dickie Moore's delivery here, as in Blonde Venus, where his sulkiness does manage to convey this heavy emotional weight.
Yeah, well, his mother is dying.
Yeah.
And he knows that. So obviously that's a big part of it. And he just wants his way.
Yep.
But so does Mimsy. And they cannot agree on what they're going to build with these boards. Where she says, you want to make a wagon? You don't have any wheels. It's so great.
Yeah, that's a good delivery.
Do you have any wheels? I
And then,
just
of
can't
course-
say enough good things. But then, yeah, what the resolution,
No,
what
but
brings them back together.
No, but the whole thing, you have to
With the
mention
thumb.
the thumb.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Because he shakes his thumb at her instead of his finger, and she can't get over how novel this is.
She just loves it, right? So she doesn't care anymore, and presumably that's always been there. Like, she's always loved these kinds of weird things about him. It doesn't matter how rudely he's behaving to her. She knows he's going to do something that she's just absolutely going to fall in love with all over again. And right there, he does it. He wags his thumb at her, and she's like, do it again. Yeah. And you get the sense that that's how things always go with them, right? Like,
Sure.
It's not like a crisis in their relationship. It's just like every day is like this with them.
But then there are
there is a crisis.
two things that traumatize them and deepen their love and make it, a trauma.
Yeah. Well, his mother dies right after this big debate.
Of course, this all reminded me of It's a Wonderful Life. Speaking of It's a Wonderful Life,
Mm-hmm.
both the death of the parent in the midst of a sort of playful, competitive love scene,
Mm-hmm.
and her empathy for him, as where we first see Mary and George when she's empathizing with him when he gets his beating from
Mr. Gower, the druggist.
Yeah.
Yes. It's just heart-wrenching to see all of this. And she decides that she's going to let him dismantle her baby carriage to build a wagon.
He's already destroyed her doll.
Yeah. He might have gotten over his mother's death eventually, but right on the heels of that, his rich relative from England comes and drags him back. It's Douglas Dumbrille, who's always a jerk. He's a jerk in this movie, although not like a Dickensian jerk. He's just a obtuse uncle. And he says, of course, you're coming back to England. You're not going to live amongst these Frenchmen.
And they try to run away together.
Yeah, it's so great. And
There is this wonderful movie that we'll probably never do because I don't think you could survive watching it, Dave, called Forbidden Games. I think the director is René Clément.
Why wouldn't I be able to survive it?
Because the basis of this movie, it's two of the most astonishing child actor performances I've ever seen. And it's about two children in a terrible world who fall in love with each other. The backdrop is, I want to say, it's one of the world wars. Let me look this up. I was just going to mention this casually, but now I have to look it up.
Is this the one with animal torture in it?
Yep.
You've told me about it before.
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 1952 film by René Clément, and it is about the Second World War, and this little girl loses her family as they're all fleeing combat, or fleeing, I guess, the bombing of a village in France, and she gets taken into the house of this slightly older little boy, and they fall deeply in love with each other, but the basis of their relationship is that she loses her dog. Her dog dies at the same time that she loses her family, and all of her grief for losing her family goes into the loss of this dog, and he buries it for her. And so to continue their relationship and to continue to help her handle her trauma, he has to kill more animals.
Oh my god.
Small little animals, but he has to kill more animals and create this whole animal cemetery that becomes a symbol of his love for her.
Oh, that sounds pretty twisted.
Well, it is, but the idea is, of course, being that this is the war is twisting these children in this way, and their inability to comprehend the magnitude of the loss that is going on around them and destruction.
Well,
right?
I could probably survive it if you want to pick it for a special subject someday.
Guy Madden showed that to me. He likes to claim it as his discovery. I have seen him specifically talking about it, so it does seem like he kind of brought attention to it.
But it was nominated for Academy Awards at the time.
At the time, yeah. I guess just in more recent decades.
All that stuff at the beginning really does so much work in getting you on board with this mystical romance and hoping that somehow these two kids are going to see each other again, because they're really torn apart in a gut-wrenching way. She's still up in this tree as he is dragged off into his carriage and taken off to England, rechristened. His name is changed because whatever he had before was no good.
Pierre. It's not English.
Right, and the last name, neither. So he's Peter Ibbetson.
No. Ibbetson is his mother's name.
Yeah, but that's not his last name. His dad's name was obviously a French name. It just means that she could never find him again even if she wanted to, because he doesn't have the same name.
That's true, but this does come up later as to why they didn't even attempt to search for each other.
You get the sense that she probably did, but he didn't. No, he was too depressed to even think of doing it, right?
Well, he probably didn't exactly think that she had also been holding on to this memory forever.
Well, that's a big part of it too, yeah. And that's so much of what this film is about, right? Like, are the things that you're feeling shared by anybody out there? And that's what Gary Cooper's been dealing with. We skip straight from the scene where he's taken out of Paris to his adult self as an architect working at this firm. He is none too happy with life. He's excelled in his profession, and his boss loves him and offers some pretty decent advice to him. And that's actually a wonderful scene too, when Donald Meek comes out of his office and tells him about what he has done to cope with the curveballs that life has thrown him. He was born blind.
Right.
He's been able to visualize things for himself.
He's the symbolic blind man who also shows up in The Enchanted Cottage.
Yeah, important to this kind of film.
What you can see that is beyond your senses.
Right.
Kind of knowledge that is beyond your senses.
He tells Gary Cooper, instead of quitting, maybe you should take a holiday and go to Paris. So that's what he does. But yeah, he's out of sync with everybody. He can't make friends. He's never had a romance.
It's very much like the setup for the returned Joseph Cotton in Love Letters.
Yeah, without the actual physical trauma.
Well, that's another war movie.
This is all just mental trauma of being forced into a world that he wanted no part of. Mother died, and then his best friend was taken from him, and he never got over it. He just sort of plugged along, went to architect school. But he has no interest in life.
But in that one scene, we do see him building the castle that later becomes important. Yeah, it's not good enough.
He goes to Paris, and of course, the prescription from everyone is, meet some nice Parisian girls and have a fling. He sort of does have a chance to do that. He meets the young Ida Lupino,
who is Cockney, but anyway.
Right, she's not from France, so that's part of what she likes about him. She could tell he was English, she says.
Oh, that's
so she's
right.
working at this art gallery, and she forces him to go on a date, practically, right? Like, she won't let him through the gate, which she has control over until he says yes.
Well, he is Gary Cooper.
Right. So they go on their date, but he's not really paying the kind of attention to her that she's used to, and so she challenges him and wants to know what he's thinking about instead of her legs. He starts eventually pouring out his ideas about what might have gone wrong and what he needs to see before he can begin to live again. He drags her off to his old home and explores it with her. It's a ruin now.
According to Wikipedia, Robert Donat and Frederick March were considered for the role before Gary Cooper, and this was a sort of casting against type for him at the time. It makes you wonder if this is the start of his portrayal of psychologically troubled heroes that he didn't necessarily seem suited for, because he was such an action hero type.
Oh, but he's so good.
Of course.
So good at playing someone that's trapped within himself.
He's such a weird actor, because he's kind of a very awkward actor, and yet at the same time he's so emotionally committed to what he's doing. And of course there's that spiritual beauty that the camera, suffering beauty that the camera dwells on at great, like, he is absolutely the movie's visual object. I don't know if you want to call it erotic exactly, but the camera is in love with him.
Yeah.
And it couldn't care less about Anne Harding.
Well, I'm not sure if if I'm going to go that far with you.
There are no scenes of simply caressing the beauty of her face the way those scenes in the prison are for him.
No, that's true. That's true. And
not that they couldn't, but Henry Hathaway has gone for Cooper here.
The story is mostly told through him. I mean, the movie is named after him. So
that doesn't mean he would necessarily be objectified like he is here.
Not just that he's objectified, he's also subjectified because
so are most women who are objectified as protagonists of Hollywood films.
Yeah, but getting at that tortured look on his face gets you right on the wavelength of torture that the movie wants you to be on.
But beautiful torture.
Yeah, of course. Exquisite torture.
Which does, as you say, does seem to be very suitable for the studio of Sternberg.
Yeah, it does. Now, I mean, this is clearly a product of the same studio culture that brought us those Sternberg films. Even though it's a completely unique thing. And it's a unique thing in the filmography of Henry Hathaway, too, who is a great director and did all kinds of interesting things, but nothing else like this. He's best known, apart from this, he's best known for his noirs of the 40s.
Sure.
The docu-noirs. The trend towards realism in noirs and cinema verite. So this is not anything like that.
Nope.
The least satisfying date ever for Ida Lupino. He won't even really swing her. He pushes her a couple times and wanders off again, looking for Mimsy in the past. And then he returns to London. He is spiritually refreshed, but not by anything anyone could have guessed. It's just by revisiting the past and reconfirming for himself that, this is the woman that he fell in love with, the child that he fell in love with when he was a boy, and he doesn't want to move on. He's not going to.
It's hard to tell whether, up until this point, he's been trying to tell himself to move on, or whether he doesn't really consciously realize how important this memory is to him yet, even though he's been making this castle for some reason that he doesn't maybe understand.
No, I think it's that. I think that he has disconnected from that memory to the extent that it's become something that was totally ruining his life without him even being aware of it. And now he's at least aware of it.
As we see later, she is the one who has more faith.
Yes.
So perhaps she is the one who has consciously remembered this, but as you say, his name has been changed, so she can't find him.
Yeah, that's always been my sense of what happened here, that she did look for him, couldn't find him, because there's nobody by the name that he used to go by, and she's the one that did marry, and she says she married out of despair, because she realized that there was really no one she could ever love anyway, so she may as well marry this really rich guy. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because they haven't met yet.
Aspects of an amnesia movie such as, I mentioned Love Letters, but also Random Harvest, where Ronald Colman spends half of the movie feeling very dissatisfied and unable to move on in his life without knowing why, and it turns out it's because he has a memory of Greer Garson that he can't remember.
Exactly, yeah. Now, in this film, Gary Cooper returns home to London and he's greeted by his boss who says, okay, we have a special job for you. None of us are equipped for it because we need a gentleman. They send him up to rebuild a stable for a lord.
Sure, but John Halliday's castle is way beyond even the home that we saw Peter grew up in.
Oh yeah, no, these are really high society. Our first meeting between the adult Mimsy, Anne Harding, and Gary Cooper, they start clashing immediately, right? Just as they always did when they were kids. This time, it's not about building a dollhouse or a wagon, it's about building a stable one way or an aesthetically refined way, as far as Gary Cooper is concerned. Neither of them is willing to give in at first, and so he's going to be dismissed and sent back to London, and they're going to have to get someone else to build it. But he breaks the ice by creating a little cartoon of how happy the horses would be in his conception of the new stable.
Now, we've missed the little scene that establishes the way in which they finally recognize each other, the crick-crack, because that turned up in a film in one of the retrospectives that we did before the pandemic, TIFF retrospectives, the films of Eugène Palcy. Some of her films have a Martinique setting, where she's from.
Yeah, she's probably most famous in North America for A Dry White Season, which is about apartheid.
Yeah,
But she did make some films actually set in Martinique, and that's the one that you're thinking of.
Yeah, one of them was a musical with some magical content, right? And that's where this crick-crack children's storytelling technique turns up. But based solely on the evidence of this movie, it appears that it was borrowed from French culture.
We don't know that. It's hard to tell because France had been
a
colonial power.
Another French colonial thing we're not too sure about in 2 movies.
They've been a colonial power for some time by the 19th century.
Sure, it could have been borrowed back.
Yeah. In essence, the crick-crack is a call and response.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to make sure that you're on the same wavelength with the person you're talking to, you just break from what you're doing and say crick, and they say crack, and then you know, okay, communication is established.
Sure, and the communication is based on us coexisting in a world of childhood story together and belief.
It's a way of together wishing two-way communication into being. And that's really what is needed here. So it's nice that they have this childhood touchstone. It's imparted to them by an old soldier who's telling them about Napoleonic era stuff. And he keeps pausing to say, okay, wait a minute, are you guys listening? So the crick-crack, it really makes an impression on them. They have a whole courtship going on, an unspoken courtship for 2 months as he builds the stable without any of this coming to light. So they do fall in love again without knowing who each other is. And then the first big thing is that they have a dream that they both were involved in.
A sort of disturbing dream about on a night of a storm?
So they're going over a cliff, or they're potentially going over a cliff on a carriage. The rain is pelting down, and she's telling about her dream, and then he just starts matter-of-factly talking about it as if he was there, and it turns out that yes, they actually were both in the same dream, which is not supposed to happen.
At this point, she is the one who demurs and says, this isn't possible, so let's stop talking about it.
We're not mystics, let's pretend this didn't happen. That very night, at dinner with third wheel John Halliday.
Yeah, another future Philadelphia Story alumni.
Oh yeah, exactly. And he is great at playing jerk patriarchs. He does it in the Philadelphia Story.
In a very sort of quiet and unassuming way, as
but
he does
threatening.
Here. Sure.
Yeah, very dangerous.
Well, she says she's not scared of her husband initially, but we know better.
He seems pretty scary. We get some great shorthand for what an unsuitable, bad person he is. His greatest pleasure in life is breaking colts.
Yeah.
And of course, she talks about the colt in a much more loving, maternal way, the way you would want to talk about an animal that is in your care. This guy, all he wants to do is bend them to his will.
So we know he's a bad aristocrat.
Yeah.
Even if he's quiet.
Yeah. He just comes right out and says it the night before Cooper is going to leave, or a couple nights before he's going to leave. How long have you been in love with my wife?
And Cooper admits it.
When cornered, he really can't deny it, so he just starts talking poetically. I mean, it's an incredible scene, and Cooper really brings everything that he's got to this confession of love.
It must have been the poetry of his beautiful face that gave him this sort of opportunity to play this sort of character.
Look, this is the same year as The Wedding Night, King Vidor's film, and he's incredible in that movie, too.
Yeah? So. Yeah, I haven't seen that recently. You keep talking about it. When are we going to do it?
Well, it's on our list now.
Is it?
Yeah,
okay.
Check it out. I think it's not coming up until 2023 or something, but we'll be watching it. That's a movie where Helen Vincent has a wonderful role, has a much more complicated other woman. She's his wife in that movie. She's the other woman, but he's married to her. Confession of love that he makes to Anne Harding, she realizes, okay, this is Go-Go. And to confirm it, she pulls out the crick and he says crack. John Halliday, sitting there thinking he was going to embarrass them, is now a witness to this mystical reunion. And that's a real slap in the face to him. You know, Anne Harding, I think, is terrific in this movie. She's an actress of the 30s that seems almost completely forgotten these days.
Apparently she was much admired for her diction at the time because she was a stage actress.
Well, I really like her.
In the early sound era.
Yeah, I think she's terrific in a lot of early 30s movies. She's in the original Holiday, playing the Hepburn part.
Yes.
And she did play quite a few Hepburnish type parts.
The movie is all about Gary Cooper.
It's true, yeah. She's not the focus. I will grant you that. But I don't think that she's a weak link either.
No.
I think that she's doing everything that she needs to do.
Sure.
It needs to be on both sides.
And she has a very ethereal blonde beauty that works in this movie.
Yeah. So they have this reconnection in the dining room. Where's it going to go? Can it go anywhere? She tells her husband that she won't see Cooper again. She will live up to her bargain. He's already known that she didn't love him. You know, this is one of those classic marriages
he
where...
does the creepy aristocrat thing where he says he's not much of a lover, but he has his pride, which means he doesn't actually care about her either, but if she humiliates him, he'll kill everybody.
Of course. So that's all he asks of her, just stay away from him and we'll go back to the way we were, which was just strangers in this house, and you get lots of financial rewards and I get to tell everyone I have a beautiful wife.
You know, based on the casting, maybe that father in the Philadelphia story, despite his lecture, is supposed to be awful.
Well, I think so.
You know, well, it's always, we always think of that as a cringe-inducing scene because of his humiliation of Katharine Hepburn's, of Tracy Lord, with his speech about how he wouldn't sleep with, like, have affairs if she had been a better daughter.
Well, it's a very confused film. It's a very confused story. It is about putting Katharine Hepburn down so that the American public will welcome her back after she's been chastened. The play was written for that very purpose.
Yeah, maybe Cooker was like, though, we're going to cast a real asshole in this part just to weight the role against him.
Even though he says these things, which the plot has to take seriously.
The audience
because
is
she's supposed to feel bad hearing it and actually take it seriously. But no, of course, he definitely feels like a melodrama villain whenever he's lecturing her. And here, he just is a melodrama villain. When he catches them in each other's arms, Cooper comes back and forces Anne Harding to talk about this.
Well, he wants them to run away.
Exactly. They're caught by the Lord. He comes in with a gun. He's decided, as soon as he walks in, he's going to start shooting.
Yeah.
And he just says, I'll give you the courtesy of allowing you to have one last kiss as I blow you both away. Cooper, the man of action here for a moment, does think quickly, grabs a chair, throws it, and this decrepit old Colt breaker dies from being hit by a chair.
Yeah. Well, that's just their bad luck, though. This is just the malevolent universe that they exist in.
Then he's just carted off to jail, treated abominably by the carceral state. We don't really see much of the trial, except in a brief flashback, and he's thrown into a dungeon forever. I guess they can't execute him because they can't really prove that he meant to kill this guy by throwing a chair at him. He gets life imprisonment for it.
Well, it is a count.
Yeah, so he's never coming out. He's in with a very unsavory crew that taunt him.
Yeah, guys who deserve to be there.
Well, unfortunately, that is the sense that you get, right? Like Gary Cooper, this wonderful man, he doesn't belong in prison, but
No.
these guys...
Fate put him there. He didn't put himself there.
Exactly. It's a political drawback of the film.
It's not much of a political film.
No, it gives you these real cretins.
Other than we can all agree to hate aristocrats.
Yeah. So Cooper lashes out at them, and for his pains, the jailers come in and beat him until his spine breaks.
Break his spine, yeah.
And that's...
It does kind of call back to the Colt.
Yeah, exactly. And this is just par for the course. This is what you can expect if
So I
you
guess
step out of
that's
line.
a bit political.
Yeah, it is. No, I think gives a pretty terrible account of the prison system in England in Victorian times.
For murderers, yes.
Yeah.
For murderers of aristocrats.
So he's lying there wishing for death.
Well, they think he's died. Should have died.
They assume that there's no medical hope for this man. He goes into his dreamscape where he re-encounters Anne Harding.
And at this point, she is completely confident in their mystical connection.
Yeah, well, she's saying, look, we had that dream before, we have it now, and this is incredible. We can go on having our relationship for decades now.
So she's put in the position of the woman who has faith. Women, I don't know, statistically at various points in various places in the West have in fact been shown to tend to be more religious. So that, I guess, makes a sort of sense. He's having trouble with his belief, and that is the subjective position of the viewer, of being the one who is skeptical about this.
So he's like, how do I know that you're really here? How do I know that I'm here? How do I know know any of this is happening, right? He enters a kind of epistemological tailspin there. She says, look, I'm going to send you this ring tomorrow as proof, and then you're going to know that we're really in two-way communication.
Really loses interest in her as a character at this point where she has this kind of certainty.
Yeah, that's true.
It's all about him coming to trust and explore this dream world.
The next day, the doctor doesn't even want to take her to the prison cell because he tells her the guy's already dead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was a little anxious at this point.
It's true. It could have happened, right?
Because he wakes up and he doesn't see the ring.
The ring is brought to him, however, so that perks him up quite a bit, and he doesn't expire at all. He recovers from his spinal injury, at least to the extent that he is able to live and live and live for many, many years.
Yes, but he lives on his back in a cell.
Absolutely.
He's sort of like the woman Irene Dunn in Backstreet, that he's just, living for these visits and otherwise has absolutely no life and will hopefully meet her again in the next world.
Well, that's not even broached, right? At first, it's all, we're going to live on for many years and we can meet every night in our dreams. They don't really talk about the afterlife until the very, very end.
It makes me wonder if they do anything other than sleep, actually.
Well, probably not. Why would he want to be awake?
Or her. She's just living in this stupid castle by herself.
Yeah. Now, she does get to know her servant's name. She must be awake some of the time there, but... No, I don't think that she's doing much with her days anyway, and Cooper obviously isn't. I mean, he is completely trapped.
So it kind of is almost a male version of this living entirely for love idea, and otherwise being deprived of any life.
And we see this rich fantasy life that they build together.
Through their first meeting.
Both movies this week were very short, both less than an hour and a half. This one just gives you enough to give you a taste of what they're going to be doing.
How much more could there be to it?
How much more does there need to be if everything's perfect every night? I mean...
Well, it's not perfect the first time.
That's true.
Did this not make you think that it could maybe be an influence on another movie that we covered for our time travel podcast, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
Yeah, of course.
That made you think of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it may very well have been something that Charlie Kaufman was aware of.
So we see them on this first adventure together when he has the ring, he knows this is all really happening, and so he has the faith to follow her out of the prison in the dream, and they go back to the scene of the trauma, the primal scene, the garden.
That is time travel, right? Because they are seeing it as it was when they were children, not as it is now, because it's a ruin.
Yeah, and they're both stuck in this past together, which is the only place they want to live.
And they are able to do all kinds of things that were fun for them as children.
Well, you even get a little hint of that, and this is very Victorian fantasy. So many Victorian fantasies, Edwardian as well. J.M. Barrie being another example. Some of H.G. Wells' stories have this idea of reverting to childhood in them, and you get this moment with Ida Lupino, that moment where she finds a swing, and she talks about he's paying no attention to her, but she's still telling us that I haven't had a swing in so many years, and she's just thrilled and delighted, right? So this is a common feeling,
of course.
Right?
Well, and that's the whole point behind the screwball comedies and romantic comedies of the 30s, right? Two sophisticated adults reverting to childhood and getting to know each other on that level, and then returning to the adult world as romantic partners.
Well, which is also a theme in Private Worlds, as we discussed.
So these movies do go together very well. And they don't just reenact their childhood fun. They do build that wagon, finally. But they do other things, and they do relate to each other as adults, and presumably they have spiritual sexual encounters as well every night in their dream world here. And he builds a castle for her, the castle from the original scene.
They go up in the mountains, and he shows her the castle that he built for her, completed and life-size, but then...
She wants to go live in it, and he doesn't believe that it will work. He thinks, okay, maybe it's just good as a silhouette on the mountain.
So this is the sort of Eternal Sunshine moment, right? Where the house is crumbling, and it's all because of his lack of faith, and they're running away from this disruption within their shared fantasy.
Really takes absolute concentration to keep this thing going. You can't have any distraction from it. You have to just be there in the moment. Presumably they do get the hang of that and they master it, and they are able to continue doing that until both of them are old and gray.
Yeah, I don't know if they ever go and live in the castle or how else this fantasy develops. That's left for us to imagine.
At a certain point, well, her lifespan comes to an end. She's the one that dies first, and she has an intuition that possibly there will be even more afterwards. And that does prove to be the case. After she expires, she is still able to come to him, which the movie never gave you any assurance that that was going to be the case. Could it just be a psychic thing that only occurs between breathing beings, or is there something way beyond this?
Well, there's also, I think the idea is that this love and this fated refinding of each other was always an inkling and an indication of this afterlife, right?
Right, but we don't get the confirmation of it until she comes to him as a beam of light.
Right. At
the end, assures him that yes, she's waiting for him on the other side of this mortal coil, and he will go to her. And that's it. Did you like it?
Yeah, I did. It was just so abrupt. Kind of goes off like you don't expect a fantasy movie to go off like a shot.
I think that's part of the interest of it. Just hits you with that at the last moment. It doesn't show you heaven. Presumably it can't, right? Like, that's why it can't even show her as a heavenly being. She's just light.
Well, she says that, yeah.
He's gonna merge with her up there, and it can't be shown on screen.
I would frankly rather not see heaven.
Exactly. That's why I like it. Yeah, I don't want to see them reunited with halos around them or whatever. I think that's great. It goes to the end right there.
Yeah.
So he's finally gonna die and get her that goddamn jail cell. Everything's gonna be bliss in the film blanc world.
It really seems that what fate in its twisted way has done to them is to inflict all of this trauma and keep them apart in order that they can go back to the garden and stay there forever.
Mm-hmm.
Which they do as adults, but young adults. They don't age after they've gone back for the first time.
Not in the dream world, no.
Yeah.
And it's interesting they meet as sexually mature adults.
Yeah. So really, as far as time travel movies go, like our summary of the time travel movie, when we did that part of our podcast, was that most of them are extraordinarily bleak and are all about how you can't recover lost time.
Right.
Or can only do so at an incredible cost. Well, I mean, there is a cost in this movie, but they don't seem to care about paying it because they actually do find a way to permanently stay in this dream world.
While they are living, there is a serious toll taken on each of them. He is trapped in that jail cell, being abused by whoever comes into his cell anytime they want. She is just mewed up.
But wouldn't we all take this sort of compensation?
I
they
imagine
really
so,
seem to be as people to have found everything they wanted through this heavy price.
Exactly.
But the time travel movie usually makes sure that you pay a heavy price and also don't get the thing you wanted.
Or it's ambiguous whether you get it or not, right? Somewhere in Time does end with them reunited in heaven, right? That could be classified as a film blanc, but maybe it's just his demented imagination as he expires by starving himself to death.
Well, yeah, it's the kind of deliberate suicide that is dwelt on in that movie that makes it so disturbing.
Right. And obviously this film has its disturbing aspects as well. They certainly did not take the normal course of courtship toward one another. So that's Paramount 1935. Both very worthwhile films, and I hope you'll check them out if you haven't already, if we haven't spoiled them for you too much.